who needs no introduction.
The Black Information Network is committed to bringing you up-to-the-date news stories that are relevant, informative, and inspiring. And while news stories are always being updated and others are breaking, we understand that you need to be in the know all week long. Welcome to your Midweek Memo on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast with me, your host, Ramses Ja. All right, so let's get to your Midweek Memo halfway during the week. What I want to do is, we got a couple of heavy stories here, a couple grim stories. So we're gonna work from the heavier stories to the lighter stories. I want to end on a high today, so bear with me. We have to start here. First off, this comes from the Black Information Network. 215 bodies have been discovered buried in unmarked graves behind a state jail in Jackson, Mississippi. This per Fox 26. So several grave sites were only identified by a number and a metal rod. Families of the deceased weren't notified until last month. They're calling for an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the unmarked graves. Discovery comes after the circumstances of Dexter Wade's death were uncovered. Wade's mother spent months looking for her son, only to find out that he was fatally struck by a Jackson police car less than an hour after leaving home. He was killed and buried without the family's knowledge. Activist Arthur Silky Slim Reed is working with civil rights attorney Ben Crump to shed light on the lack of transparency, respect, and humanity in handling the deceased. Reed said, "The burial site in Jackson, Mississippi is filled with buzzards, scavengers, and a disturbing stench as bodies are placed in shallow graves without embalming. Many of the deceased's loved ones believe the victims were missing until they were notified last month." Reed noted that the issue extends beyond race, as both white and black individuals were discovered in the unmarked graves. The activist, Crump, and attorney Dennis Week are calling for a federal investigation into the unmarked graves and a potential civil rights violation in cases like Wade. So the truth is that Mississippi is kind of suffering from a domino effect. We often state, I'll speak for myself, I often state that there are systemic issues at work, and I determine this based on data that comes my way, and the way that I interpret the data, and the way that most reasonable people interpret the data. However, there are folks that I believe do an amazing amount of mental gymnastics so that they can misinterpret the data, so that they can preserve more or less the way things are, because the way things are is very comfortable for them, or at least not uncomfortable to them. And Mississippi is showing us what happens when you pull at the string that unravels the quilt. A lot of the hidden racism that takes place in this country, it's hidden. You know, we can see the data, but we can't see the actual activities. It's not available for us to see. It just doesn't exist in the physical world like that, where we can clap eyes on it. We have to deduce and extrapolate again from data. And so a lot of this stuff goes untold, unpunished, until such a time as something more visible breaks the flood walls. And I think that's what's happening in Mississippi. Because in Mississippi, bear in mind that that's the same place where the 6 white officers subjected 2 black men to hours of grueling violence and then tried to cover it up. Mississippi is the place where the 11-year-old boy was shot in the chest by police despite holding his hands up. His name was Adarian Murray. If you look up either of these cases, you'll know that they were covered extensively. And I was going to cite more examples, but when I went to Google, just to Google Mississippi police, so many other stories came up, some of which we've absolutely covered. A lot we haven't. And it shows the level of racism and corruption within the police departments there. And now everyone gets to see it. And the unfortunate part of this is that people think, oh, see, Mississippi is crazy and Mississippi is crooked. And they get to sit back and say, well, in Alabama, we don't behave that way. Well, in Arkansas, it's fine. In Tennessee, there's nothing to see here. So again, there's a lot more here than just a mass grave where police are dumping bodies. There's a lot more here than, as I mentioned, Mario Moore and Dexter Wade, the two black men that we discovered back to back had been buried without their family's knowledge. And the more this thread continues to unravel, the more we'll see how deep this type of corruption can go, this type of racism can go. Because again, if we never found out about Dexter Wade, or if these 6 white officers had been able to get away with what they were doing, and if they didn't have a separate national news story with Adarian Murray being shot with his hands up at 11 years old, and all the rest of the goings on in Mississippi, people wouldn't now be scratching their heads and saying, is there something wrong with the police? Is there something wrong in Mississippi? Well, now we know, of course, the answer is yes. Moving on. This one also comes from the Black Information Network. Multiple employees at a Texas IHOP have been fired over racial discrimination allegations, CBS Texas reports. Keisha Mitchell and her boyfriend, Elvis Pauley, said an IHOP waitress in Mesquite refused to serve them because of their race. Quote, that is a very traumatic experience. You don't know what your thoughts are, reactions are going to be until you experience something like that, Mitchell said. Mitchell said they visited the IHOP to celebrate Pauley's 49th birthday last month and were in disbelief at how they were treated. There's another quote. When we got to the restaurant, we were told that we were not going to be serviced because of our color, Mitchell said. It's a shock and your brain is not processing what you're hearing. According to Mitchell, another employee admitted that their waitress wouldn't serve them because they were black. In a video shared on social media, a manager says, one of our morning servers is picky. Quote, she didn't want to say she was racist. She said she's picky. No, that's not being picky if you're selecting only a certain group of people that you want to serve, Mitchell said. In a statement, the IHOP franchise owner, Anthraper Restaurants, confirmed that the employees involved in the incident had been fired. Quote, since our founding, we have strived to create a warm and hospitable dining experience for all guests. We have zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind or actions that allude to any form of discrimination. We have fully investigated this matter and taken appropriate actions, including the termination of the employees involved. This isolated incident is not reflective of our ongoing commitment to our guests and team members. Additionally, we will be providing additional anti-harassment and anti-discrimination training to ensure that all remaining team members understand the company's unwavering intolerance of any prohibited form of discrimination. So, I'm kind of glad that this story happened, not obviously for the experience that these folks went through, but I think that it's timely because if you're like me and you saw the exchange between Dr. Cornel West and Sean Hannity, you realize that Sean Hannity was quick to suggest that Dr. Cornel West was, quote unquote, playing the race card in his defense of Claudine Gay, the former president of Harvard University. And it's this playing the race card, or this accusation of playing the race card, that's what I want to say, that is problematic because it's hard enough, I believe, to say, you know what, that felt a little racist. I don't think everybody's mind goes to racism. I don't think that the majority of us live in that space. But there are some times when that's how it feels, especially if we can't make sense of it any other way. You know, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, swims like a duck. And there's another part to this too. We're used to just interacting with people. I think our ready assumption isn't that when we walk up to a person, they are going to hate us because of our race. So I think that for the most part, our conversations begin with that sort of benefit of the doubt. I don't know if you hate me. I'm going to assume that you don't. I'm not going to assume that you love me, but I'm not going to assume that you hate me. I'm going into IHOP to eat. I'm going to spend money. This is a win-win. And so to then call something racist, a behavior racist, and I'll be fair, framing activities of non-Black people through the lens of the history of this country, there's a lot more racism that I believe we excuse than the racism that we call out. This has been my experience being a Black human in the United States of America for over 40 years. So when people like Sean Hannity try to make themselves the victims by somehow suggesting that we are playing the race card as though it's some sort of catch-all, some sort of superpower, I don't think if any of us could choose to have to play that card, we would want to. Truth told, we wouldn't even want to need that as a defense. We wouldn't want to have to deal with these things in the first place. If there was no racism and we were playing the race card, then sure, Sean Hannity might have a point. But him saying that on television to his mostly white conservative audience reminds them that they can say that as a way to excuse their own racism when they are challenged by Black people. Oh, you're just playing the race card. Don't call me racist. Don't say that behavior was racist. And I think it's really more in that space. A behavior can be racist, even if a person is not. And a lot of times, those people who are called out on that behavior feel like they themselves are being called racist. I personally believe that everyone should have a road to redemption. I believe that everyone should have the ability to be forgiven, provided that they learn and so forth. And I don't condemn human beings who are flawed to a permanent status of badness, evil. You're not just evil. You haven't learned yet. Behavior was evil and you can learn to be better. And one day you will be my brother or my sister. We'll sit down and share a meal. I think that's very important because for those folks who don't have a path to redemption, they tend to join the opposition. Oh, if they think I'm racist and there's no redemption for me, then I'm just going to be racist. Human beings are funny that way in that we seek community. But again, I'm very glad that this IHOP incident resulted in these folks getting terminated and this making national headlines, because just like Sean Hannity is saying race card, race card, race card on his show, we need examples of bona fide racism so that we feel like we have a leg to stand on when indeed we have to call it out, and that there will be action taken against that injustice. This is your Midweek Memo on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast with me, your host, Ramses Ja. All right, we are going to lighten things up a bit here. This one comes from MSN.com. Black North Carolina man who spent 44 years in prison after he was wrongfully convicted of raping a prominent white woman has been awarded a historic $25 million settlement more than 3 years after he was exonerated. Ronnie Long, age 68, settled his civil lawsuit with the city of Concord, about 25 miles northeast of Charlotte, for $22 million, the city said in a news release Tuesday. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation had previously settled for $3 million, according to Duke Law School's Wrongful Convictions Clinic. The clinic, which represented Long, said the settlement is the second largest wrongful conviction settlement recorded. Quote, "It's obviously a celebratory day knowing that Ronnie is going to have his means met for the rest of his life with this settlement. It's been a long road to get to this point, so that's a great outcome." It's from clinical professor Jamie Lau, Long's criminal attorney, and he said that on a phone interview Tuesday. He goes on to say, have we found justice in this case? Absolutely not. No amount of money will ever compensate Ronnie for all that he lost, but this is a big step forward for him. The city also issued a rare public apology to Long. This is why I think the efforts of Brian Stevenson with the Equal Justice Initiative are so important. We've talked on this show before with one Jason Flom, and his work is critically important to overturning convictions, pointing out data that shows that there is a flawed system that is affecting people's lives. In this case, a man lost 44 years of his life. 44 years. I know if somebody came to me and said, hey, do you want to trade me 44 years for $25 million? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's too much time. And time is really the only resource that we have, and we can't replenish it. I could use 44 years to try to get $25 million. I can't use $25 million to try to get 44 years. That's a one-way street. And again, looking at the data, I happen to know that since 1973, 195 people have been exonerated and released from death row since 1973. That means these people were sentenced to death. And then subsequently, 195 of them were exonerated and released. Now that may not be as alarming to you as it is to me, but I think I can make that live a little bit more for you. 1,582 people have been executed since 1973. So that means for the amount of people who've lost their life, they've identified approximately 12% of, or let's say it this way, 195 people is just over 12% of 1,582. That error rate is tremendous. Would you get on an airplane if 12% of the time airplanes crashed? That's almost a direct quote from Brian Stevenson. So the error rate and the wrongful convictions that are prominent in our criminal justice system, this is just death row numbers. This isn't petty crimes. This isn't, people that can't afford bail or, they end up in that cycle because they lose their jobs or they lose their childcare or what, it's really easy for poor people's lives to crumble with our current criminal justice system set up the way that it is. There are wrongful convictions left and right. So again, shout out to Brian Stevenson and Jason Flom, and shout out to Ronnie Long, man. That's not nothing because, we can deduce from this that there are a lot of people who die in jail for stuff they didn't do. We have the largest prison population on earth in this country. So your powers of deduction will let you know that there are people who die in prison, mostly black and brown and marginalized and poor people die in prison for stuff they didn't do. And Ronnie Long, at the minimum, ends up walking away with some money. And that's not nothing. All right. And before I let you go today, it's going to be even more positive than that. This one comes from NBC. Ralph Yarl, who was shot in the head by a white homeowner in Missouri after mistakenly ringing the wrong doorbell. Remember him? Well, he has now secured a spot in the all-state band months after the shooting. Last week, North Kansas City Schools publicized in a Facebook post that Ralph Yarl was one of 4 students in the area to earn the prestigious recognition. Yarl plays the bass clarinet and was named second chair in the all-state band, according to the post. Quote, bravo to Eliza Cockrell and Stephen Kwan from Northtown and Ralph Yarl and Carter Walters from Stolly. They've earned a spot on the 2024 Missouri All-State Orchestra or Band and will perform at the Missouri Music Educators Association annual conference in January at Margaritaville Lake Resort in Lake of the Ozarks. So again, just another feel-good story right there. Obviously, he's someone who could have lost his life. Getting shot in the head at such a young age for ringing the wrong doorbell by an old racist man is not something that we want any of our children to go through. His face was all over the place. I remember Sean King ended up raising some money for him. But again, money does not buy time. And it does not buy the wealth of experience it looks like Ralph Yarl has gotten back to. So that made me feel good, and I'm glad I got to share it with you. So we'll leave it right there, and we'll talk again soon. All right. Peace. This has been a production of the Black Information Network. Today's show was produced by Chris Thompson. Have some thoughts you'd like to share? Use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app. While you're there, be sure to hit subscribe and download all of our episodes. I am your host, Ramses Ja, on all social media. And join us tomorrow as we share our news with our voice from our perspective, right here on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast.